What's up, guys? Simone Fan 101 here, and finally I made another video on this goddamn list. Uh, this is number 8 of my top 10 video game series of all time. Now, this series, out of all the series, is unique. Because it's actually, first of all, based on a movie series. It's not like games like Kingdom Hearts or Jak and Daxter, which are, games made of their own accord. Um, or some of the classics that we'll get onto later on the list. But this is a game series that's been ingrained in my skull ever since I was a boy. I am, of course, talking about the Star Wars games. Now, like I said, unique. But, yeah, the Star Wars... For some reason, the Star Wars games, they always seem to pump out some pretty damn good games. Now, admittedly, Star Wars does have, out of all the games, the biggest crap ratio, which means that out of all the games out of all the series that I have on this list, it has the most amount of bad games in compared to the other series. But it's just has an overwhelmingly amount of good games that I had no choice but to put on this list. So I grew up with so many of these games. I went back and played them. And I played other ones. I played the new ones. I played some older ones. I played all the kinds of games. And it's just a lot of fun. Now let's get to it. Like Star Wars, the games themselves go back to the Atari 2600 with games like I think it was like Jedi Academy for the 2600. There was these like one level games made from each of the episodes. Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, being the most memorable. Your ship, and you get to classically shoot down the walkers on the Battle of Hoth. But my first experience of Star Wars goes back to the Super Nintendo. It goes back to, and this is all thanks to my brothers, thanks to emulation and how we can emulate games and shit online. But my first experience of Star Wars games goes back to the Super Nintendo, and I think the first game I ever played, if I remember correctly, was Super Star Wars, which was based off of New Hope. Now, back then, this was before they re-released it and made episodes 4, 5, and 6. And I played all 3 of the games, and they were basically platforming, platforming adventure action games that was just a lot of fun. And I think I played the first one, which, if you look at the graphical and art differences between that one and Empires and Jedi, notice a big difference, but it's still a very fun game. I remember playing as Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, Chewie, which you get to play a lot more of in the sequels. Empire Strikes Back, I played the least when I was a kid, but I honestly think it's probably the best of the 3. Possibly the hardest too. But that was a lot of fun. That goes back to me just loving the games just so goddamn much. The music, they made the music very spot on. The music was was handled very, very well. It gets me pumped every time I hear that boss music in Empire Strikes Back. And of course, the final battle against Vader, that was epic. And especially the boss music fit that fight perfectly. And of course, Return of the Jedi. You get to do some not first person shooter type of thing, but like kind of like an overhead view type of like mini games where you would ride in the desert of Tatooine, which was actually the very first level of the game. You could ride on the speeder in the Forest of Endor. And of course you could, on the final level of the game, which is probably one of the biggest flaw was that you could be the Millennium Falcon and destroy the Death Star once again. I'm not saying that the first 2 games didn't have this. They had it, but Return of the Jedi, I think, kind of nailed it in that sense. And of course, the final bosses were, of course, you get to face Vader again. He's not as difficult this time around. And you get to face the Emperor, who, when I was a kid, always kicked my ass. Of course, over time when I got older, obviously, I beat the games. Fuck you, Sidious. But the games were just a lot of fun. And honestly, if you could make any of the other movies, any of the shows, any of the spin-offs or whatever, you could make it into this style of game, and it would be just as good. It would be that damn good. Sorry, my nose is starting to get plugged up, but I'll do what I can. The next game I remember playing was Jedi Power Battles for the PlayStation. This game I played a lot when I was a kid. I beat it. It's a special variation of Episode 1, where you get to play as Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and if you have the PS2 version, if you have the PlayStation version as opposed to the portable versions, you get to play as Mace Windu, Plo Koon, and I believe Aayla Secura. It's either Aayla Secura or Shakti, I forget which one. But those games, I had a lot of fun playing. Now, it was, a little clunky due to the fact it was PlayStation, but I thought it was fun. I think it's fun. Some people don't like it. I personally do. But just, there was a lot of good games. There was a lot of, bad games, but there was a lot of good games. Like, there was Shadows for N64, for example. There was, damn, my throat. Shadows of the Empire. There was, Rogue. There's many games. Shadows of the Empire, Pod Racer, Rogue One, I believe. There was Rogue Squadron. There was, there was the actual Episode 1 game, which by all accounts was really not that good. There was, there was, of course, there were games based off the movies. There was the Episode 1 games I just mentioned. There was the Episode 2 games for Game Boy Advanced only, which, honestly, they were not that good at all. In fact, you could say they were shit. But then they bounced back with the best of the 3 series, the Episode 3 games, which was very much, almost like greatness, almost. Episode 3 on the PlayStation 2 and the Game Boy Advanced and the DS. I played all 3 of those games. I beat all 3 of those games. Game Boy Advance and DS are virtually the same game, just the DS has a couple extra flying levels. But other than that, same game. But they were great games. You get to play as Anakin, you could play as Obi-Wan, you could fight the bosses. On the Game Boy Advance version, there was a special boss as Obi-Wan. When you played as Obi-Wan, you get to fight like a 3 series of Magna Guards, which was a lot of fun. As Anakin, you get to fight, the Jedi, which I always found the best part of each version of the game. You get to fight the Jedi. And on the home console version, you can play a versus mode, and you could play as, in a versus mode, you could play as not just Anakin and Obi-Wan, but as as Dooku, Grievous, Sindrag and Serra Kato, which are game-specific characters, Mace Windu, I love this so much. You get to play after you beat the game. When you beat the game as Obi-Wan, and then you beat it as Anakin, because level 16 and 17 are virtually the same. There's another level, a bonus level, and on this bonus level is actually based off the fight scene from Episode 4 between Darth Vader and Ben Kenobi, and you get to play as Darth Vader, facing off against old Ben Kenobi. I marked out like a little bitch when I figured out how to do it. I always thought, the final 2 playable characters would be, okay, it's Darth Sidious and it's Yoda. It's gotta be. Those are the only 2 lightsaber wielders are missing. And I was a quarter right. Because in other bonus modes, like rush modes and that kind of thing. You can play as a Magna Guard in one sense, and you can even play as Yoda invading the temple. But God, it was just so much fun. And of course, I was quarter right, but that's the only way you can play as Yoda. You cannot play as Sidious. The one thing I did find funny was that at least in the home console version, there's virtually little to no mention of Padme whatsoever, which is funny because that's part of the whole. That's kind of the whole reason why Anakin turned into a Sith Lord in the first place, was because he wanted to protect Padme, and she was barely even in the plot at all. At least they fixed that in the Game Boy Advance version. You know, they gave her dialogue, and she was part of the ending. You know, dying and everything. But, God, just a lot of fun these games were. I'm starting to sound like Yoda. That's how much the fun... God. I'm just watch. Tomorrow morning I'm going to be turning green. But some of my greatest experiences was playing this game. Now, I still have a few Star Wars games right here. This is, it's kind of reversed because it's a camera, but this is 3 Star Wars games I have for PC, which is Battlefront, Battlefront 2, and, honestly, I kind of forget, Republic Commando. And, God, I love all 3 of these games. Battlefront, probably my least favorite of the 3, but it was very good, and you had a lot of levels in there that, you know, you couldn't play as in the original, in Battlefront 2, considered the best of the bunch. You know, the Bespin, which is the Cloud City, several other stages you couldn't play as, or stages that were very unique. I just wish that, and Battlefront 2 is a great game. It is definitely one of my favorites. Like, if I had to make a top 3, Battlefront 2 would be on there. But, yeah, it was just a lot of fucking fun. And, yeah, it was missing some things, and the gameplay at times could be unfair as fuck, but the games were a lot of fun. They were. They really were. Republic Commando had, like, the personality where, like, the 4 troopers, the 4 soldiers had, like, a lot of personality. That I thought was a lot of fun and funny to listen to. And they were great first-person shooter games. When it comes to first-person shooter... Well, actually, you could play in Battlefront and Battlefront 2, not so much Rogue Squadron. You could play in third person. But, you know, being a classic fan, I always played first-person shooter style. Most people do. In fact, when I think about it, especially Battlefront 2, when it comes to first-person shooter games, it sometimes never gets mentioned. And I find that a complete travesty. You have Halo, Call of Duty, you have fucking GoldenEye, and this one was right after GoldenEye, but God, it was just a lot of fun. I don't get why people don't put it on their list sometimes. It just, to me, it's almost like not fair. But they're great games, and I have a few other games here. I have for Wii, I have both Force Unleashed games, which I played both different versions of. I played the Wii versions and the Xbox PS3 versions. And those games are just fucking amounts of fun. Revenge of the Sith, at least the home console version, is like, you know, and I'm just going off topic slightly here. You could, you know, run around in 3-dimensional plane and everything, and, you know, kill a bunch of guys and stuff. I heard some people say it online, I gotta agree with him. In a sense, Revenge of the Sith is a precursor to what eventually became The Force Unleashed. And it makes sense, you know, going around, killing a bunch of enemies, fighting a few Jedi bosses, it makes sense. And of course, the game it's a decent game, but decent at best. It's not that great of a game. It's okay. Star Wars, the Clone Wars for, the GameCube, it's fun, but it can be pretty hard, not hard, but kind of repetitive at times, but it's still kind of fun if you get past that shit. But there's just a lot of games that I remember playing so much. There was a lot of shit games. There was the NES games, both Japan and the US versions. There was the like the Atari 2600 games were okay. The NES games were shit. There are the games based off of the Clone Wars TV show, the CG show, which weren't really that good. God, you had the episode 2 games; those sucked ass. But you had a lot of good games. You had, of course, how can I forget to mention? You had the Lego Star Wars games. Those games are excellent. By all accounts, those games are a ton of fun. The Star Wars, Lego Star Wars, the video game, the original trilogy, the one based off of the Clone Wars show, which was probably the only thing based off of the Clone Wars show that was good, video game related at least. The complete saga, and I hear they're making, or they've already made, Lego Star Wars Episode 7, which I haven't played it yet, but I want to, God, it's so much fun. There's just just a lot of fun. If I had to choose my favorite Star Wars game, my absolute favorite, it would have to be, it's a really close call. But if I had to choose my favorite, it would probably be. I'm probably gonna be in the complete minority when I say this. It's a tie between Episode 3, which I grew up on, and Battlefront 2. Those games are some of my favorites. Force Unleashed is another one. Super Star Wars is another one. There's just a lot of great games, and say what you will about some of the bad games, but I think the good games really outmatch it. The music is just fantastic. It's based off the movies, of course, which, of course, if you watch the movies, they're always great music. The gameplay for some of them are really fun. I find it funny that on the several occasions that they actually try to make a Star Wars fighting game specifically, it falls flat on its ass. But when they make a versus mode for a Star Wars game, it kicks ass. Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith. The versus mode on there kicks ass. The first Force Unleashed game, while not a kick-ass versus mode, has a lot of characters, and the versus mode for Force Unleashed 2, and these are for the Wii versions only, by the way. The versus mode for Force Unleashed 2 is a lot like Super Smash Brothers, where you're 4 characters. You can jump around the stage. You can play as several characters, some of which you wouldn't even think to play as in the original in normal gameplay. Of course, you got Starkiller and Darth Vader. But you also got, you could play as a Grievous bodyguard. You could play as Asajj Ventress. You could play as, I think, Count Dooku, maybe. But you can play as several characters. And I believe Ron Coda. I believe. But it's been a while since I played the Versus mode. But really, that really shocked me that the Wii versions even had a Versus mode. Because the game, I remember 2 specific fighting games they tried to make that fell flat on its ass. The Clone Wars fighting game, and the infamous, the PlayStation game, Masters of Teräs Käsi, or Kasai, whatever. We all know how shitty that game really is. It sucks ass. But there's a lot of great games. I grew up on these games. Come on. There's some games you play as a child that you just don't get over. Star Wars, for me, is one of them. You have so many games. You have the Super Star Wars games. You have the Episode 1 games, which are okay. You have the Lego Star Wars games, which are great puzzle solvers. You have the fighting games, which are the fighting adventure games, I should say, which are, Episode 3, The Force Unleashed. You have Pod Racer, which is a racing game. They need to make more racing games. You have some of the portable games are actually pretty good. Like I said, Episode 3 is pretty good. One game I will say, shit, though, is Flight of the Falcon. Great concept, but the graphics are so fucking ugly. They really, really are. But, yeah, these are some of my favorite games, and what I love so much about them was that they were different. They were different from the normal games we would normally play. The games based off the Clone Wars, not show, but like the era of Clone Wars was kind of good. Battlefront was actually probably my favorite of those games, definitely actually. Republic Commando is a fan favorite of mine. I played the new Battlefront game, which is also pretty good, but I still got to go with Battlefront 2. You can play as fucking Chewbacca, for God's sakes. That's awesome. You could play as, prequel trilogy characters like Ki-Adi-Mundi, Aayla Secura, Mace Windu, Anakin before he turned into a douchebag. You can play as Darth Maul. That I always found was awesome because Darth Maul is my favorite character. So yeah, there's just a lot. There were several good games, some bad ones, so you got to sift through it. But there were several good games that I would recommend. So that's got to be it. Till next time, guys. Number 7, I think you may like. Until next time, guys. Peace. Sorry, Lundrick, I took your line.